Hello, my name is Anubhav Swami, and today for this presentation I'm going to be talking about a scalable RAVPN architecture in Oracle Cloud using Cisco Secure Firewall. In recent years, we have seen that there is a great demand for RAVPN and remote worker. So in this video, we'll talk about if you have your applications in Oracle Cloud, how can you design your architecture in such a way that you have a scalable architecture with multiple firewalls that can scale using DNS load balancing or network load balancer. I'm going to be talking about how you can provision multiple firewalls within a virtual cloud network and multiple availability domains. So let's start with a basic design. If you look at this architecture, I have designed this architecture using multiple firewalls and multiple availability domains. Now we'll start from left. We have outside VCN, virtual cloud network, and then on right hand side we have inside VCN, and on inside VCN we have our application servers. There is another subnet which is used for out-of-band management. So that subnet is known as management subnet. And now on left-hand side, we have DNS. So this DNS can load balance your VPN connections. So imagine your customers are interested in deploying a scalable architecture. You can design architecture in such a way that you will have multiple firewalls and firewalls will be deployed in multiple availability domains. Now, one thing you should keep in mind that you will create a FQDN on your DNS, or you'll register a domain name. In this example, I'm using example.vpn.com. User on the internet will use example.vpn.com as their VPN headend in their AnyConnect client. Now, when your user will send query for example.vpn.com, in return, DNS server will provide IP address of your firewalls, and those IPs are public IP addresses mapped to outside interface of your ASA. Now, one thing that you should keep in mind, on your DNS, you will enable health monitoring for each ASA, and you will also enable or create a record, and each record will point to public IP address of your ASAs. Now, another important thing that you will keep in mind is you will have a dedicated VPN pool for each firewall. For example, you'll have 192.168.100.0/24 for VPN pool on firewall 1, and on firewall 2 you will have 192.168.101.0/24. That way you can add static IP addresses and static pools or static routes in your environment, and you can bring back traffic to the required firewall. For example, if you're connected to firewall 1, you will get IP address from pool 192.168.100.0/24, and on the inside subnet you will have a route pointing to that subnet on inside interface of your firewall 1. But if you're connected to firewall 2, you will have IP from 192.168.101.0/24, and your route table will point to second firewall. This is how you can scale out. So you can add multiple firewalls as and when required. You just need to add a firewall, add a record in your DNS, enable health monitoring, and you're good to go. So you can start with N+1 model where you start with 2 firewalls minimum, and as and when required you can keep on adding multiple firewalls. Now on the management side, for ASA you have options like Cloud Init or Day Zero. You can use CLIs or APIs to configure your firewall. or you can use on-box manager known as ASDM, or in the cloud you have option of choosing Cisco Defense Orchestrator, or if you are on premise you can use Cisco Security Manager as well for managing your ASA. But if you plan to deploy next generation firewall or firepower threat defense, you can manage it using Cisco Secure Firepower Management Center. This is one way of doing load balancing across multiple availability domains with multiple firewalls. You can also use network load balancer. Now in this example, instead of using DNS, what I'm doing is I have a network load balancer, and that network load balancer points to outside interface of my firewalls. So if you look at this architecture, it's pretty much the similar architecture. You will have dedicated VPN pool for each firewall. Instead of DNS, you are using load balancer. But when you deploy such kind of architecture, you need to make sure that instead of 5-tuple load balancing on your load balancer, you will use 2-tuple hashing, because that is the preferred way of load balancing your traffic. But in this example, I have outside VCN, inside VCN, and management VCN, similar to the case that I've shown in the previous slide. Only difference is instead of DNS load balancing, I'm using network load balancer of OCI, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. But again, for each firewall, there is a dedicated VPN pool, and in the route table, you define your route back to the dedicated ASA. There is another example where I can have a combination of DNS load balancing and load balancer as well. Now in this example, I have two regions, region US East and then I have US West. Now instead of using DNS, what I'm doing in this architecture is I have a DNS, and that DNS will point to my network load balancer in each network in each region. For example, in this architecture, I have US East and there is a load balancer, and in US West there is another load balancer. So on my DNS, I have two air wickets. First air wicket points to my load balancer in US East. Second air wicket points to second load balancer in US West. So user on the internet will try to access example.vpn.com, and that request will be resolved by DNS server. In return, DNS server will reply back with IP address of NLB. So it can give me IP address of NLB in US East or US West. Then the user on the internet will send out any connect request to load balancer, and load balancer will have firewalls in the backend pool. So your load balancer will then run load balancing based on 2-tuple for your SSL VPN connection. So again, the load balancing that you see in this particular architecture is for SSL VPN. And for management, there are multiple options available. I've already discussed it in the previous slide, but if you have ASA, recommended mode of management is ASDM, unless you have a lot of firewalls and you want to use CDO or CSM. But if you're starting with 2 firewalls, you can use on-box manager. If you are starting with next generation firewall or firepower threat defense, you can manage it using Cisco Secure Firepower Management Center or FMC. So in this video, I have discussed about scalable RAVPN architecture in Oracle using Cisco Secure Firewalls. I hope you enjoyed this video, and thank you for watching.